And welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this evening's Be Our Guest with Martin Bailey of Wildlife and Countryside Services. How are you this glorious evening, Martin? Yeah.
I'm very well, Neil. Slightly chilly, but that's okay.
Okay, but you're not actually sitting outside in a sun-drenched green habitat. That's obviously just a very nice photograph that's behind you, is it not? Yeah.
I'm afraid so. Yeah, this is a place that it will be featured in the talk, but I miss it. It's been far too long since I've been back there.
Okay, so how many years is that? Is this now? This will be 2 full years since you've been to Poland, or did you manage to get something?
I went in January 2020. That was the last one in the snow, but the last summer one was June 2019.
Okay, so it's been a while. So this evening, you're going to tell us a little bit, or maybe quite a lot, about the wildlife of Poland, or at least the wildlife in the part of Poland that you go to and in the habitats that you visit. So what I'm going to do, Martin, is I'm going to stop, pardon me, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then if you then take over driving the bus, and we can then use your presentation slides, and then I can just sit back and slip my tea and try and be more quiet than I'm normally accustomed to.
Okay, so right. Hopefully that's working.
Okay, we're not quite, we're still seeing your, there you go, that's it now. Right, everybody, I give you Martin Bailey, Wildlife Countryside Services, Polish wildlife trips. Go for it, Martin, all the very best.
Thanks, Neil. Right, okay. First of all, just a little intro as to why I bothered taking people with me to Poland when I could quite happily enjoy it all by myself. The simple fact is that it's got biodiversity that we haven't had in the UK for a very long time. Certainly none of us have seen biodiversity in the UK in our lifetimes because it hasn't existed, not to the extent that we see it down there. So the critical thing for me is that our secret corner of Poland is a landscape that is similar, very similar, with many of the same species as we have here, but in much greater numbers, and also including species that are rare or extinct in the UK now, including wolves and lynx, and even things like redback shrike, and purple emperor butterflies, things like that that are not often seen. So that's the reason I go, and that's the reason I take people. And I've written a little thing here, which perhaps you'd like to read out, Neil, in your dulcet tones. And it explains it a lot better than I can in my stumbling verbiage.
Okay, that's a lot of big words there, Martin, but I'll give it a bash. Trying to recreate a biodiverse and ecologically functional landscape when you've never seen one that's directly comparable in terms of species and habitats is like trying to do a really complicated jigsaw puzzle with most of the pieces missing and no picture. In fact, it's much harder, but most ecologists and habitat managers have never seen such places. How was that?
Well done, Neil. No stumbling at all. I think that sums it up quite nicely. There are many people out there rambling on about biodiversity, having never seen it, thinking that we've got biodiversity in the UK when we actually haven't, and trying to recreate biodiverse and ecologically functional landscapes and habitats when they really haven't got anything to go on, which is why we're in the mess we're in at the moment. So that's why I take people to our secret corner of Poland. So I'll stop rabbiting on about that and go on to some of the details of some of the trips we've been on, which hopefully will give you a feel for what we get up to. So I'll start with winter, because that's our first trip of the year. We didn't do one this year for obvious reasons, but it's an interesting time to go. The area we go to is the Magura National Park, or Magurski Park Narodwi. It's mainly forested landscape, but there are areas in it and around it that are extensive wildflower or flower-rich meadows, many of them hay meadows. And that's where much of the biodiversity is found in the way of invertebrates and such like. But obviously in the winter, we don't get much in the way of wildlife activity because a lot of it's asleep. It's generally just me and my guests wandering around the countryside looking for signs of larger animals like wolves and lynx, wild boar, and other such critters, and not seeing a great deal of thriving wildlife because it's simply not there very much in the winter, except for a few species. But what we do see is areas like this. This is a beaver dam on the main river, actually down the valley where we stay. Usually the beavers will dam up small tributaries. This one's a little bit larger river, but not too big. And we see many of the signs that beavers leave, which are absolutely distinctive. If you see this anywhere, it's beaver. And there's more and more places in the UK where people are able to see these, and sometimes with some degree of surprise because they don't necessarily know they're there. Again, this is a beaver habitat. This is a beaver pool just up the valley from where we stay. The dam is down in the bottom left-hand corner, and you'll see the river in the background disappearing off up the valley. This is a valley I know very well. The forest is mainly birch and hornbeam. You can see it looks quite thin in winter. You can see the snow in the distance there through the trees. It looks actually quite barren because it's beech and hornbeam. There's not very much ground flora. And you'd think actually there's not a great deal in there. But actually there's a great deal does go on in the forest, even though you may not see it firsthand. One thing we do come across regularly in the winter especially is tracks. If we get snow, snow can be spectacular. It can be much better quality than we get here, which is not that difficult. And we get tracks, and sometimes we get tracks that are rather more interesting than others. These are the tracks of a pack of wolves. I'm standing on the road when I took this photograph. The wolves have wandered down the road, leaving their tracks and their scats and their yawing patches everywhere, and then they've gone off up into the forest. We'll find other tracks. This is a track of a cat on the left. What kind of a cat? Not sure. Could be a wild cat, could be a domestic cat. It's virtually impossible to tell the difference between the two. Wild cat arguably is a little bit bigger, but domestic cats vary quite considerably. So we often find small cat prints, and if they're up in the forest, we assume that they're wild cat. This one was down on the road. And the image on the right is a pygmy owl. It's the only one I've ever seen. It was, in that week, it was one of the few animals we actually saw. Not that we cared, because we had a lot of fun anyway. But that was just on the side of the road, just sitting there and watching us, which was quite nice. We also sometimes see the wild boar. They're very common in the forest, very secretive, nothing really to worry about in the way of safety, although if a big male hit you, you'd certainly know about it. The females are much smaller, and these are just a couple of piglets, which I managed to catch with the camera as they hurtled off into the distance. Some of the signs they leave, though, are quite substantial. This is my friend Stefan, and this excavation is one of many in this particular area that we found. Some of them were just huge craters. They looked like somebody had shelled the area. And massive boulders shifted out. This is the work of wild boar. They're not just rootling about in, making little holes here and there and digging up little tubers. They are making huge excavations. They can create a lot of what most people would call damage, but obviously it's part of the natural system. This disturbance is good. It's good for germinating seeds. All sorts of things will crop up on these little excavations. Then as we wander further afield through the landscape, this is at the top of the valley where we stay. It's an area that, it's very apt at the moment. This is the remains of a village. That little thing in the middle is basically the remains of a house or some such thing. That's all that's left of the village. This is an area that's cleared during the wars by either Russians or Germans. People moved out of the area. But you can see from the landscape and the aesthetics of the icicles on the trees, when we get perfect weather there, the snow and the snowy landscape is actually exquisite. It's like nothing I've ever seen in the UK. Sadly, though, with climate change, we're getting less and less of this kind of perfect winter. But it does still happen. This is up in the forest. One of the paths along the border, there's a border path between Poland and Slovakia, which goes along the ridgeline. This is up there, quite high up. These are the lower Carpathian mountains. And again, that's hornbeam and beech woodland predominantly. And this is a friend of mine who some of you will probably know. He came with us on a couple of our trips with his wife. We had a thoroughly good time wandering about in the snow, getting lost, and getting back just before dinner, which was worrying for some, but yeah, it's all good fun. This is on the border path again. I don't know what the signposts are saying, but you can read the distances. Yeah, it's a nice little path, but it takes a bit of work to get to it. And this is his wife, slogging along up towards the tower. There's an observation tower there, which is in sad repair, unfortunately, where you can climb up equivalent to about 2 or 3 stories and look out across the extensive forest, which stretches across the landscape, across the border into Slovakia, almost unbroken. Something you just wouldn't see in the UK at all. Up here, of course, we find tracks. This will be a wolf track. Not as often as you'd think you'd find them, but they are fairly commonly found. And then, of course, we've got other tracks. This is another cat, probably a wild cat up in that sort of location. And we do come across other creatures. Bison's not something we've actually seen in the wild yet. This one's one of the captive breeding population. It was surprisingly difficult to get a photograph of it, considering it was captive. One day we'll manage to track them down, we'll find a location, and we'll be able to take people to see the bison wild. On the right, you'll see a lynx in the top right, caught by one of our trail cameras. This was on one of my earlier trips. Beautiful picture, beautiful cat. And the lower picture is of a wildcat. And hopefully this will work. Sometimes we go a little bit further up or even into a different area. This was actually a different area, but it gives you a feel for what it's like up in the forest on top of a ridge, surrounded by trees, in the cloud, absolutely pristine, nobody around for miles, and totally silent, apart from the odd creak or bit of icicle falling off a tree. Absolutely stunning, well worth the effort to get up there, even though we almost never see any wildlife. The wildlife becomes secondary in the winter. It's just the experience of being there is quite something. But we do occasionally see the wildlife, and this was a nice find. It's not a particularly rare species down there, but it's not one we get in the UK. This is the white-backed woodpecker. And we spent quite some time trying to get close to this one, and obviously managed to get some footage of it. It's a nice little bird, and when you've been trudging around the countryside in the snow for a while, it's nice to have an excuse to sit down and watch something for a bit. So that's the winter. As I say, not a lot goes on in winter. We're mainly tracking. We can travel for miles tracking wolves, and anything else we come across. Never quite know where we're going to end up. But the prime time for being there is in the spring or early summer. Spring is a nice time of year because obviously things are starting to grow. This is a beaver dam not far from where we stay, in the middle of agricultural land. This is grazing land and a bit of forestry. A minor stream through a valley, and the beavers have created a series of dams like a set of locks, like a set of step locks on a canal, down this fairly steep valley. And that's their lodge on the right where they stay. There are more dams further upstream from here and also further downstream. This is one of the downstream ones. It's obviously flooded a nice bit of ground, but not too much of an impact on the farmland. And in this area, people are well used to beavers. You know, they're not a big problem, and they probably won't be much of a problem in the UK once they start to get established. One of the other dams, this one's slightly upstream from the lodge. You can see some marsh marigolds down there. There's a whole series of these dams all up and down this valley, and across the road in the ditches as well. They dam pretty much anything they can. Further across in the forest, we've got some other pools. There aren't many, certainly not of this size, but this one later on in the season is heaving with life, whether it's amphibians or reptiles on the land, dragonflies, butterflies. It's just heaving with stuff. And most of the habitats are like that in our little area of Poland, because they haven't been destroyed yet, basically. So we go out of the forest now, and we go to the edge of the forest where the meadows are. The road is to our right. We're looking up the valley, which is the valley that we stay in. This meadow, this time of year in the spring, it's not doing a great deal. There's a few flowers there. Come the later spring and the early summer, it will be heaving. It will be a hay meadow, flower-rich hay meadow, teeming with wildlife, including sand lizards and more butterflies than you can count. You'll also get species like this, the white stork, traipsing around. One easy way to tell how biodiverse this habitat is to watch a stork across a field or across a meadow. You'll see it walk a few paces, it'll stop, it'll bend down, it'll pick up a lizard or a mouse or something. It'll eat it, it'll move on another few steps, pick up something else. It'll go across the whole meadow doing this. And it just shows how rich these places are. They're absolutely heaving wildlife. Contrast that to the meadows and fields in the UK, where there's virtually nothing. You know, there's not a great deal in comparison. Even in our richest meadows, they're isolated pockets. There's not very much in the way of diversity there. But it seems to us like there is, which is why it's important to see the real thing. So from the meadow, we go back into the forest again. There are bears in the area, although sadly not many. This is the European brown bear, of course, so not grizzlies, but still something to be wary of if you happen to come across one. They will steer clear of humans. And this is a good example of what the woodland looks like. Much of it is quite young. I suspect it was cleared at some point. There are some old trees in there, but most of it is fairly young. And you can see that there's very little ground flora. There are a few young trees coming up. That's because it's beech and hornbeam. Nothing much grows underneath them. And it looks pretty barren, really. There are some big trees. Obviously, that's a fair size one. It's down now. There are a few more around in that area. not as many as one would hope for, but eventually the others will get older and they'll start to provide some really interesting habitat. There are some really nice crevices and cavities in some of these big trees. Also on the woodland floor, you'll find species like the lizard. This is, well, I don't know what kind of lizard it is. Common lizard, maybe, I don't know. But it's in the middle of the forest, having a bit of a sunbathe and not doing very much at all. So these species are there, you just got to keep your eyes open for them. And usually the first you know about them is they're scurrying away and you can hear them scurrying through the leaf litter. But there are other things in the forest, bigger things, things that may come as a bit of a surprise. Even if you know they're there, we put out trail cameras and we, in the early days, we'd go around and we'd collect them on the next trip. And so one of the things we'd do is we'd sit up in our little common room of an evening after we'd collected the cameras during the day, and we'd go through the footage on the cameras. Sometimes, 5, 6, 8 cameras. And mostly it would be deer, and more deer, and yet more deer, and wild boar, and some more deer, and not much else, maybe a fox. And then just occasionally, there'd be a sharp intake of breath because we'd come across something like this. This was the first lynx that we ever caught on the trail cameras. And it's only a short bit of footage, but it's quite stunning. And it just goes to show that, these animals live up there. You wouldn't know they were there. We never see them. The chances of seeing one is virtually nil. And the same would be the case if they lived in the UK, if indeed they don't already. We also have shots of wolves. This was the first wolf shot I ever picked up, way back in May 2013. Stunning animal, at the same water hole as the lynx. And these wander around the forest in packs of maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 individuals. But again, you really wouldn't know they were there. They howl occasionally. Occasionally you'll find the footprints, but the chances of stumbling across them, again, is slim, although more chance than with the lynx. There's another one this is across the valley from that last one, on the next ridge. This is a spot that's been particularly good for trail camera footage. We've had wolves passing through, and we've even had a video of wolves passing through. So this is just a pack of wolves wandering about, 6:30 in the morning, end of March. Just doing nobody any harm at all. There's foxes, of course. There are fewer foxes because of the wolves. It's an example of the whole trophic thing. One of the problems in the UK is that we have issues with the lower predators, if you like. So foxes, crows, such like that. If we had the apex predators, wolves, goshawks, in quantity, then these pest species would be in much lower numbers and wouldn't be so much of an issue. We don't see foxes very often in Poland. There are quite a few around, but we don't see them very often. And crows even less so. And you'd be lucky to see a magpie. It's actually quite exciting when you see a magpie there because they're quite uncommon, presumably because of the predatory birds. We've also got the wild boar. As I said before, they're quite common. And again, this is that same spot next to a water hole. These water holes are quite interesting because they're up on the top of the ridge. And they're very important for the wildlife because if you're walking around on the top of the ridge, you don't really want to go all the way down to the bottom of the valley for a drink. So these water holes are extremely valuable, not just for the animals, but for anybody who wants to put camera traps out. And then you get something like this, which is the best video we've had, or best image what we've had of a lynx so far. Again, this was in the spring, end of April, 9 o'clock in the morning. So, you know, this is the time of day when we could be wandering about up there. We'd never see this animal. It would be long gone before we got anywhere near it. But with the trail cameras, we can see it, and we can see what it gets up to, where it goes. And this is an animal we could have back in the UK very soon. In fact, they could survive in the UK now without too much bother, and nobody would know they were there. So that's the spring. So any questions or any points, Neil?
No, it's all good. It's all good so far. There is now and again a very slight delay, but I don't think it's causing any issues. I think people are get accustomed that when you start talking about a slide, the slides maybe, maybe 5 seconds, or so behind. You're talking about it a few seconds, but that's nothing that you can do anything about. Yeah, you said your corner of Poland. What side of Poland are we in? Are we northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest?
Southeast.
Southeast, okay.
Southeast of Poland, on the Slovakian border, in the lower Carpathian Mountains.
Perfect, perfect. How do you get there? Do you fly into the capital?
No, we fly into Rzeszów. Rzeszów is it's east of Krakow.
Okay.
I suppose it's probably east northeast of Krakow, something like that. But it's certainly east of Krakow. Krakow's down in the south.
Okay.
So it's kind of northeast of there. We fly into Rzeszów, and then our Polish friends who we stay with, they collect us and take us down. As we travel down through Poland, it's quite interesting to compare and contrast with what we've got in the UK. The landscape is basically not as degraded as the UK, mostly, yet. But you can see as we go out from the airport and head towards the mountains that the land gets gradually wilder the further away from the cities you get. It gets wilder, it gets more scrubby. You start to see maybe a small herd of roe deer crossing the road. You see the odd bird on the side of the road that's a bit unusual. In the winter, we often see great grey shrikes, which is nice. But they're all examples that there is food there and there's a bit of biodiversity. But it's not until we get through the forest and into our little secret valley that we really start to see what biodiversity looks like. In fact, I wait for a moment when we get there. We pull up outside the place where we stay and we all jump out and the back door is opened and everybody gets their bags out. And I stand back at this point. I stand back on the other side of the road and I watch and I wait because I know at some point these people, their brains will switch on. These are ecologists mostly. Some of them much more experienced than I am, older than I am. They've seen a lot more than I have. And suddenly their brain will switch on and they'll register the noise of the insects and the birds. And their bags will be half out of the car and they'll stop there and they'll stand there with their mouths open, listening to this cacophony of sound that you just cannot hear in the UK anymore because we just don't have that density of species. We don't have that number of individual species or species in general. These are common species that we're familiar with mainly, but there's much more of them because there's so much more food and so much more habitat.
Yeah, wow.
And that's what you'll see in this next section.
Okay, go for it. Go for it.
Right. Okay, so camera trapping was one of the things that I concentrated on early on in my trips, starting in 2013 and going right through up until 2016, 2017. It was a big deal, but I was losing quite a few cameras to hunters would find them and take them, and it got quite expensive. But we did get some lovely shots. This one you've already seen, the the first wolf. We've got a few more shots. They're usually less than perfect. That's the back end of a wolf. And that's a wolf in the mist, in the cloud. And that's the front end of a wolf. It might even be the same wolf, who knows? That was 17th of August, that one, 2014. Often these images aren't particularly good. Occasionally we'll get one that is, this one is actually a crop. I've zoomed right in on the image. But this was a stunning shot of a wolf. Again, up in that location where the water hole was, which was very good. Nice little fox. And then I would often put the cameras down in other places. This one's down by the river. Well, the first two images are down by the river. Nice pair of roe deer. Black stork, very special bird. There's only, I think, 200 pairs in Poland, I think, breeding. But we get them where we go. So not just the white stork, we get the black stork as well. And they're a spectacular little bird. They're not huge like the white stork. They're quite dainty, but they live in the streams and the rivers. I'm not quite sure where they nest, but they're certainly usually found down by the streams and the rivers where the white storks are generally in the meadows. Then we've got some wild boar piglets with their mums. They're called humbugs because they look like humbugs. And then we occasionally get strange people wandering around in strange places. This is one of my guests who was, well, he is a dragonfly expert. We took him along to see what kind of dragonflies we had, if there was anything special that we didn't get in North Wales or in the UK. And he spent a happy week wandering about, looking at dragonflies and damselflies and exuviae and all the other things that dragonfly people do. Sadly, he didn't find anything particularly special. We found white-legged damselfly, which was quite nice. First one for me. Not particularly common, I don't think, over here, but they seem quite common over there. So he was very happy. And we find this with these specialist naturalists. You can just stick them in a bit of habitat and you can actually leave them there for half the day or even the whole day sometimes. And you come back and they'll still be in roughly the same area you left them in. There's so much to keep them occupied. There's a nice dragonfly. That's the golden ring dragonfly called Julogasta boltonii. Probably the only one I know the name of. Nice little roe deer on the edge of the forest and a lizard of some sort. I'm not an expert on these things, but it gives you an idea of the diversity. These things are easily seen. You don't have to go looking for them particularly. They just pop up in front of you. This is an example of one of the summer meadows. You can get a feel for how rich it is by looking at how many different types of flower there are in the grasses. The heap in the middle is it's basically hay from the previous year. They often don't do very much with it, except they leave it out for the wildlife. This area is outside the national park, but it's an area called the Landscape Park. It's a different designation, not quite as well protected as the national park. It has certain requirements that they have to enhance the landscape for wildlife. So they'll leave these heaps of hay out for the deer and for the boar if they need them. And then as we look closer at the meadow, you'll see more and more different species. These are all on the forest edge. This is pretty much how habitat in the UK probably looked a long, long time ago. You get forests and then you get scrubby areas, wood pasture, that sort of thing. A mosaic of different habitats. Plenty of yellow rattle in there, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, but a vast array of different plants, many of which I don't know what they are, some of which I can't even put into a group. I'm not a botanist, but you can leave a botanist in the meadow like this for hours, and then very, very happy. The same goes for entomologists. Some of the butterflies are very spectacular. The main thing with the butterflies is there's so many of them. The place is just teeming with butterflies. You've got blues, you've got more blues, you've got various fritillaries, you've pretty much anything you can think of is there. You've got moths. We've got a nice little burnet moth there. I'm not sure which one it is. Could be a transparent burnet. I know that one occurs in the area. More fritillaries. One of our little jokes is that after a couple of days, people are saying, yeah, oh no, not another fritillary, because they're just too common and they're too difficult to identify. Certainly for me, I haven't got a clue what these are. There are just lots of them. There's at least 5 or 6 different species, I think. I haven't got a clue what they are. We have the same reaction with purple emperor butterflies. People, saying, no, not another purple emperor, because they've seen so many over such a short time. It just gives you an idea how rich the habitats are. I think this is a large copper. It's one of the coppers anyway. Again, quite a common butterfly over there. That's on St. John's Wood, I think, by the looks of it. I'm not bottoms. No idea what that is. It's a pretty thing. Again, very common on some kind of knapweed by the looks of it. I'm not a botanist. I'm not an entomologist, but I do enjoy photographing these things and wandering through the habitats, because there's all sorts of other things in there as well. We've got mole crickets, which are very rare in the UK, I believe. There are field crickets. There are bush crickets. There are grasshoppers of all sorts and shapes and sizes. There's sand lizards common in the meadows. They're everywhere. You'd be hard pressed not to see a sand lizard during the week that we're there. This particular meadow, just below the forest, was the first place we came across corncrake. We knew exactly where it was. It was in that patch of grass in front of us there. We've got it pinned down to within a couple of meters. We knew precisely where the bird was. I went round behind it. I walked down slowly towards it. Nothing happened. It wasn't there. They are impossible to find, almost. Back to that later. In this area, we also had purple emperors. Now, I haven't got the pictures in this slideshow, but there were purple emperors landing on us. There were purple emperors on my guests' trousers, picking up sweat. There were photographs being taken of other guests' backsides because they had a purple emperor on it. It was quite amusing. They were just really, really common and not scared at all. This is the border path up in the forest. So we're back up into the forest now. Quite nice on the border path because you get these nice little sunny areas. But if you're in the forest itself, where it's a bit damper, you'll come across these little characters. They're difficult to spot, but once you've seen one, you realize that there are actually quite a lot of them about. It's a salamander. I believe it's a fire salamander. Amazing little creatures. And they're just everywhere in the forest. All you've got to do is learn how to spot them. We've talked about the big trees before. This is fairly typical of some of the big trees. The one on the left is a dead stem, thoroughly rotted, thoroughly hammered by woodpeckers. One species in particular, the black woodpecker, which is relatively common in the area, and of course covered in these massive fungi. That's a black woodpecker nest hole in the tree, which of course will provide roosting site for bats. It was a bit high to get up to, didn't have an endoscope, didn't have a license to check them, but there's a pretty good chance that was probably a breeding site for bats as well. Barbastels are relatively common as far as I can tell, and it's hardly surprising when you look at the habitat. So coming out of the forest again, we've got a lesser spotted eagle. And we've got a landscape again of meadows and forest, and we've got some people who are transfixed by butterflies and more butterflies. And we spend hours just wandering around in the meadows and the woodland edge, just looking at little things like this, taking photographs, enjoying the sunshine. And then, of course, you just have to stop for lunch. This is by one of the old churches. This church, you can't see the church in these photographs, unfortunately, but it's got shingle walls. It's a leaded roof, but it's got shingle walls. So there's all sorts living in the walls, probably bats, certainly hornets, and doubtless a few beetles as well. In this churchyard, we found I think the lesser stag beetle, amongst other things. We've also found smooth snake, grass snake, slow worm, all sorts. And it's a flower-rich graveyard as well. Overhead, we have species like the golden eagle, which is always nice to see, very difficult to photograph. Yeah, we don't see them very often, but they're usually around. You just have to keep your eyes peeled and stop looking at the ground. But when you are looking at the ground, you sometimes come across this. It's obviously a heap of scats, but which species? Any guesses, Neil? It's got bones in it.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to go there. It's not a bat, that's for sure.
No, it's not bat scat. This is wolf scat.
All right, okay. Yeah.
And you can see it's covered in butterflies, and there's a sexton beetle of some sort, a burying beetle. There were 7 species of butterfly on this scat because of all the nutrients. So many of these butterflies will gather basically on feces and other squashed animals on the roads, and they will feed off the nutrients and the salts and whatever else that they need. But 7 species of butterfly on one heap of scat. You just wouldn't see that in the UK. Also on the roadsides, we get sand lizards. They're pretty common. They're much bigger than any I've seen in the UK, although I haven't seen the south of England ones. And they're just pretty much everywhere. If you're not in the forest, then you've probably got sand lizards not far away. And they're pretty easy to get close to if you're careful. That's another copper butterfly, spectacular insect. More fritillaries. I think that's pearl bordered of some sort. More fritillaries. Oh no, not another purple emperor. Oh no, not more purple emperors or more scat. And then we've got a slow worm. They're, again, fairly common. You don't actually come across them very often, but turn a few things over and you might find one. We've got the white storks nesting. The poles put up nest platforms for them, and you'll see below there's another little bird that's probably nesting at the bottom of the nest, underneath the nest. In the meadows, you'll see the roe deer from time to time. There are also red deer there. And we have some special little birds like this one, the black redstart. This is common, and it breeds there, and it breeds in wood stacks on the side of buildings, on the side of houses. Really common little bird, pretty rare in the UK. More fritillaries. Another burnet moth. That's a marbled white, I think. These are all in the same bit of meadow, some kind of grasshopper, or is it a cricket? I don't know. Some spectacular little flowers. I've got no idea what this is, but it's pretty. This, I believe, is the Roussel's bush cricket, female. Spectacular little animal, really interesting coloration on it. And again, these are very common. It's just a bit tricky to get close to them. More butterflies. This is a map butterfly, not one I was familiar with, but it comes in 2 forms. There's an early form and a late form. This is the early form, I believe. The later one looks completely different. So if you come back a month after this one, the next generation would be a different color, a different pattern. This is very interesting. You think it was a completely different species. This is the chap that told me all that, having a great deal of fun in the meadow. This is the only swallowtail butterfly I've ever seen anywhere. It was on the side of the road in a mud patch. Spectacular animal. This is the stag beetle that I was talking about. And not only do we have humbug baby boar, but we have humbug beetles, shield bugs actually, not beetles, which are quite spectacular. There's another shield bug and a beetle, and two people photographing something interesting, and more people photographing interesting things. And that's pretty much all we do, is we wander around just as a gentle amble, seeing what turns up. It's very laid back, and it can take us several hours to just travel a mile or two. It's quite phenomenal. This is the one of the tiger moths, and I can't remember which one it is now, and another map butterfly on the underside. This slide is in just to remind me that this is the location where I was photographing something interesting. I was photographing, I think, this, which is a bush cricket nymph of some sort. And suddenly there was a shout. Did you see it? Of course, I was focused on this little bush cricket, wasn't I? Our guests had only seen a pine martin within a few meters of where I was standing, in the middle of the day, in the sunshine. Nobody got a photograph of it, but that was what it was. That was what was there. It's just amazing what will pop up. Sand lizards, again, common. You should be able to get photographs of sand lizards most days. Redback shrike, again, very, very common. You can see why they don't exist in the UK anymore, except the odd one here and there. They need scrub, they need invertebrates, they need small reptiles to eat. And if they haven't got that, we don't have the birds, so they don't breed here anymore. And then of an evening, we wander back to where we're staying, and we get a shout from the housekeeper, who doesn't speak English, which can be quite entertaining. And there's a beaver down in the dam below where we stay that we can see from the garden where we stay. And that's our garden beaver, if you like, among the butterbur in the little pool that they've made behind their dam. And that's it again. And hopefully this video will work. And you can watch these, or at least try to watch them, every morning, every evening. They're just over the fence. But you do have to be a bit careful that you don't disturb them. They don't like people. This is the best view I've ever had of one. That was the sound of a car going over the wooden bridge. That was enough to spook it enough to go under the water and disappear forever. But we do have the trail cameras. This again is down in the pool or around the pools where that one was, below where we stay. Obviously taken at night, just before midnight, 20th of June, 2019.
Is that the beaver making a sound, is it?
It's having a good old mooch about.
Yeah. Was it making
water dripping off its back.
Yeah, can you hear me, Martin?
And you can see the line of the path that it regularly comes up and down. Back into the water. But there are other things that crop up at the same location. This is just within a stone's throw of where we stay. Didn't expect to find one down there, but they get everywhere. These little pools at certain times of year are heaving with life. I've found baby grass snakes by the dozen, by the hundreds in these pools. We've got pine martens wandering about looking for prey, and even a few cats. Whether these are wild cats or whether these are domestic cats or hybrid cats, I don't know. But this is just below where we stay, on the edge of the village. And there's no reason why there wouldn't be wild cats wandering through there. I suspect they're domestics or hybrids, but still interesting. And then we go back to the meadow. This is one of the hair streak butterflies. Can't remember which one it is, on a broom rape parasitic flower. We've got common lizards, or that might be a sand lizard, actually, I'm not sure. These meadows are extensive. I mean, they go on for a very big area. And this whole meadow would be heaving with sand lizards and other small critters. This is the beaver pool we saw at the beginning that was covered in ice from a different direction. It's now heaving with damselflies. My guests here are looking at the blue damselflies by the dozen. Find interesting little spiders. This one's got an egg sac that looks like a juniper berry, which is a bit unusual. I have no idea what it is, but I find it interesting. Copper butterfly of some sort or other, or is it a blue? A copper is a blue, I think. Caterpillars, lizards, beetles of one kind or another. There's a very special beetle we haven't found yet called Rosaria, I think it's called. Big longhorn beetle. We're hoping to find out at some point. This is the habitat that's behind me. Beaver created wetland. It's right next to a main river. They've built a dam alongside the river, which raises the water level behind the river by about 1 meter, maybe more. And this whole wetland area, flooded wetland, is basically willow scrub, which the beavers manage and maintain. And it creates ideal habitats for a multitude of species. And this is what we should have in the UK. This valley, incidentally, that we're in now, is the valley where we broke one of our records. It took us 4 hours to travel less than a mile. There was so much to see. And this is where you'll see some of it. This is one of our more interesting little critters. It's a deer fly, and it's on my friend Carl, having a nice feed. I'm very grateful to Carl for standing still and letting me photograph it. It's a really beautiful little insect, but it doesn't half pack a punch. So if you see these, keep clear of them. Nice little beetle. And then we had this. This was the high point of the week, I think. It's a bird that I know Neil has heard recordings of ad nauseum at various conferences. It's a corncrake, and one of our guests decided to play a corncrake call on his phone. and the corncrake couldn't resist. It came over to have a look and presented itself in all its glory. And this will give you an idea of what we saw. This is just, I don't know, 3 meters in front of us. It's the kind of sighting you just dream of. Usually you can just hear them, you can't see them at all, even if you're just a few feet away from them. They're so secretive and elusive, it's just ridiculous. I've actually been within 3 meters of one of these things in the dark using a night vision scope, a thermal imager, and still barely been able to see it through the vegetation. They're just amazing. And they are never where you think they are when they're calling. They're always further away. There it goes. Yet another fritillary. We're up now on the hillside where I had a small mishap, but we won't go into that. This is a hillside where we occasionally go to look for adders, and we see a few other interesting things as well. We've got a pipit there on a tree, which is obviously a tree pipit because it's on a tree. Again, we've got extensive meadow of a slightly different type, different species, and lots of insects again. It's just heaving. And one of the nice things about these areas is that tree pipit is on a juniper. Juniper is quite common where we go. In the UK, it's not very common, and it's these little differences that make all the difference to some of the wildlife. We've got more butterflies. We've got a scorpion fly there in the top right, a male scorpion fly. I'll go back there just in case you haven't seen its tail. Just looks like a scorpion tail. Redback shrike again. Yellowhammer. Now, yellowhammer we're probably all familiar with, but how often do you see them? When was the last time you saw a yellowhammer? I can't remember the last time I saw one in the UK. Probably the last time I saw one was in Poland in 2019. They're common there, the same as the shrikes, the same as the stone chats, the same as so many other species that we hardly ever see in the UK because we destroyed the habitats. Again, we've got extensive meadows, we've got forest, we've got juniper bushes. Fortunately, no naked men lurking behind them. If you get the reference. And then we get something like this. When you least expect it, you find a blue slug. This is the famous Carpathian blue slug. And it's the only one I've ever seen. But they're quite spectacular, aren't they? And they're a big slug too. If you could ever get excited about a slug, that would be the one. And then we've got more crickets. It's a cricket. It's a female cricket. I have no idea which one it is. We've got more dragonflies. That's the broad-bodied chaser, Libellula depressa, I think, the female. We've got purple emperor butterflies. And you won't guess, of course, what they're feeding on. More scat. They do love their scat, their feces. In the UK, I think people look for purple emperors up in the treetops or in sallows if they're laying eggs in the sallows. We just look on the side of the road for scat, and then you'll find the purple emperors. And sometimes by the half dozen, 10, maybe even a dozen of them, all in the same area. And they're not too bothered with people. They're just common, as they used to be in the UK, probably. Quite a beautiful insect. And then we've got, we go back towards the base where we stay. We've got Hornet in the room where I was staying, checking the place out, looking for interesting morsels to eat. Hay meadow management, and that's the beaver pool below where we stay, which gives you an idea how far away we are from those beavers. Makes it very easy to try and watch them. That's summer. So there's just a handful of images left to go for the autumn, and then that's it. Anything you want to say at the moment, Neil?
Yeah, okay. So how big was that slug then? I mean, how many inches roughly, or centimeters?
Probably about 6 inches or so.
Wow, okay, that's pretty cool. And was it translucent? Was it translucent at the back, or was that just the way the picture was taken?
I think that was just the light.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
They're pretty opaque, but they're amazing colour. You very rarely see colours like that.
Yeah, no, wow. Right, you talked about hunting. Are they allowed to hunt in the national park, or
no?
No, but do they anyway, or is it fairly well managed from that point of view?
There is a certain amount of hunting that goes on, which is why the hunters don't want trail cameras around the forest.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Makes sense. No, brilliant. Let's do autumn. Sounds good. Yep.
Okay, so autumn is obviously for mushrooms. Polish people really love their mushrooms. We learn a great deal from our Polish friends about which mushrooms they use, how they use them, how they prepare them. And we spend a great deal of time wandering about the forest, collecting what we find, identifying it, talking about its edibility or toxicity. And we're also listening out for red deer, because it's generally rutting time when we're there in the autumn. Late September time, maybe early October. This year will be early October because I'm having to move the thing back for the back conference. So we basically bimble around the forest with baskets and look at the mushrooms. You'll possibly recognize this one as one of the stinkhorns, a stinkhorn egg cut in two. But some of the mushrooms are quite stunning. Obviously, we've got things like fly agaric and the parasols, which we're fairly familiar with. The chanterelle in the bottom right there is just one of many we've seen. I've come across areas in that forest where you can find chanterelles almost as big as a dinner plate. And in an area of maybe 5 meters by 5 meters, that's chock-a-block with them. And then you'll go another 100 meters and there'll be another big patch of the same. And it's just mind-blowing. You know, these are arguably one of the best, or certainly most sought after mushrooms that people rave about. And over there, they're really, really common when the weather conditions are right. Obviously, we have to hope that the conditions are right when we're there. It's not just about mushrooms, though. We find other things when we're there. This is some tracks we found in the mud as we were wandering about. Almost certainly wolf tracks, or a big dog, but probably a wolf. And then our little friend, I mean the little black and yellow one, not so much the other guy. Some of you might know him. So salamanders, again, pretty common and always nice to see. And then we find other things which are a little bit less pleasant to think about, especially at the moment. These are left over from the war. Old, I assume they're mortar shells, just left in a heap, left behind when the soldiers deserted the place. Lots of soldiers died in these forests. They're very difficult forests to navigate. They're very steep-sided, lots of ravines. It's quite difficult to navigate through them. It's quite even if you can navigate the right direction, it's very difficult terrain to cross. You have to follow ridges, which invariably lead you in the wrong direction. So it's easy to get lost. And yeah, lots of people died there. And this is one very happy bunny after his third trip, I think, with us in the forests of Poland. And that's it.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating, Martin. Thank you so much for that, and certainly a lot more to those trips than what I imagined. And I think what was quite interesting there is, and I think you touched upon it, is dependent upon what someone in particular might be interested in specifically, there seems to be quite a lot of interest. So if you're an entomologist, there's a lot of stuff that's going to interest you. If you're a botanist, you know, same. If you're into your birding, same. If you're into your mammals, reptiles, amphibians, etc. You know, it's as you keep saying, extremely biodiverse, and lots of stuff going on. So you go over to Poland, what, 2-3 times a year in a normal year? Is that what you try to do?
Yeah, I try to go in the winter, which is generally end of February time or thereabouts. Try and get the snow. Obviously, we can't guarantee the snow, but if we can get good snow, then it makes tracking a lot easier, or possible. Then I go in May, usually mid to late May and mid to late June. I do 2 weeks in the early summer, late spring, early summer, because it's just so good to be there. I want to be there. We only take small groups, so we only take up to 6 people. So, you know, going twice in the summer basically means that, well, one thing, I can go there twice. And secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, we can take more people and show them what the UK probably looked like 100, 200 years ago. Then again, we go in the autumn, usually late September time-ish, for the fungi and the red deer rut. And you can get pretty close to the red deer, obviously with some degree of care. And hopefully we get a reasonable harvest of mushrooms as well, which we can then prepare, or our host will prepare. And as you say, whatever your interest, most of us, even if we've got a specialty, are interested in other things as well.
Yeah.
I was primarily a birder when I started. Then I went over onto mammals because I found photographing birds rather challenging. Not realizing that photographing mammals is actually rather challenging as well. And now I find myself very interested in almost everything. And I've learned a lot from our guests who are specialists in certain fields, especially the butterflies and such like. You know, I know butterflies and moths now that I never knew before. We've had some stunning experiences. We had one of the guys put up a lamp on the side of the house where we stay. It's actually the old schoolhouse. It's got whitewashed walls, so we put a lamp out one night. We had some spectacular insects turn up. Eyed hawk moth. I'd never seen an eyed hawk moth before. It's massive, beautiful. Lots of elephant hawk moths. And then we had the maybugs, the cockchafers, coming in like Chinook helicopters. You could hear them coming way before you knew they were there. They'd fly into the wall or fly into your head. You'd have to escort them to the other side of the building and let them go. And then by the time you got back, there'd be another one coming in. Quite stunning, sometimes literally. So, and of course, we've got the bats. There are lots and lots of bats.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, because this is bat ability, of course. So
yeah,
we'd expect at least. So you haven't talked too much about the bats, but have you put out statics? Have you used any bat detectors over there? Yeah.
Yeah, I've put out statics. I've got quite a few recordings. I'm not quite sure where they are now, but I've got quite a few recordings. My problem is that I've got the statics, I've got the location, and I've got the recordings, but you know a hell of a lot more about bats and bat calls than I do. In fact, probably most people know more about bat calls and identifying bat calls than I do, certainly in the bat field. So they're kind of just sitting there somewhere on a hard drive. Right. I've got no idea what they are. I know some people have said, oh yeah, we've got barbastelle. Okay, fine, I'll take you at your word. You kind of expect all that first. What else is there? I don't know. There could be, 20, 23 species there, going by the atlases, the mammal atlas and stuff like that. So what's there? I don't know. What we need is a bat specialist to come along. And that's not necessarily going to be you, Neil, because I know how busy you are, much as we'd love to have you along. But we really need to have a bat specialist to come along to just identify what the bats are. So we can say to people, look, we've got this really rare bat, or this bat that you'll never see in the UK. Or whatever, because we need to expand our knowledge about what's there so that we can further educate people as to what might have been in the UK. Some of the species would never have been in the UK. But the majority of what we see there would once, or still is, in the UK. We've got golden oriole there. They're in the garden singing their little hearts out. And they used to occur in the UK. Long time ago.
Well, you still get them, but they're very, very patchy, very rare.
Exactly. They certainly don't breed, I don't think, at all at the moment in the UK, as far as I'm aware. They might do one here and there, like redback shrikes, unnoticed, but generally these species are gone. So you see the species that we're familiar with, or that we know we used to have, and then on top of that we have species that probably were never in the UK. Ural owl. We occasionally see a ural owl, which is a big owl. Our tawny owl is a fairly big owl, and our biggest UK owl. But the ural owl is big. I mean, it's a big beast.
Yeah, I've seen them. I've seen them in captivity. I've never seen one in the wild. But, but that pygmy owl you photographed, that's about the size of a sparrow. It's just a little bit bigger than a sparrow from memory. Is that about right? Is that about the right size for a pygmy owl?
Well, I'm saying it's a pygmy owl. I may be entirely wrong. It's a small owl. Yeah. I would say it's probably the size. Well, thinking back, it was a long time ago. Perhaps the size of a blackbird or something.
Okay, yeah.
Obviously,
I'm not totally up on my small owls, but I know there's pygmy owl and there's Tegman. Oh, I can never get
Tegman's owl. Yeah,
that's the one. But I don't know if both of those species would occur in Poland or not. But I think they're the two. I might be wrong here, but I think they're two of Europe's smallest, if not the smallest, owls that we have in Europe.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And again, we could really do with a bird specialist. Another bird we have there is the nutcracker.
Nice, yeah.
Which is it's a stunning bird, but they're quite secretive. You quite often see them flying across the valley between one bit of forest to the next, and their call is fairly distinctive. It's kind of it's one of those raucous crowy calls, a bit like a kind of cross between a magpie and a chough or something.
Okay,
It's a weird call. But you think, well, that sounds kind of crowy. It looks kind of nutcrackery, so that's probably what it is.
Yeah.
And then you see they're
quite distinct. They're quite distinctive birds when you get your eye on them. But back to the bats. I mean, even if someone went over there that was just, even if they were just kind of mid-table, confident with their bat identification. And they weren't able to identify everything, and as everybody knows, you can never identify everything anyway. But there would be a very good stab at, what Nyctilis species are there, what Pipistrellus species are there, what horseshoe species are there, how many of these non-pipistrelle species accumulatively are there relative to pips? Is there a lot more encounters with Myotis species than what you would typically get in the British Isles, for argument's sake, bat for bat and stuff like that. There'd be a lot of fascinating bat-related stuff, and as you're saying, ornithological related stuff as well. That's fascinating.
Yeah. And I think one of the issues we've got is that we'll take people out after dinner. We'll go out for a walk. Sometimes people will decide to go and watch the beavers after dinner, which is fine. But sometimes we'll go off for a walk in the dark. And it's a question of really, I mean, we never know what we're going to find. We never really know what we're looking for. Sometimes we'll go out with bat detectors, but we'll usually have a thermal imager with us as well. So often we're not necessarily focused on the bats. We might be listening to bat calls, but because none of us there are particularly good at even British bat calls, when you're over there and there's maybe different species of myotis, for instance, that we don't have here, you tend to listen to the bats, enjoy the calls, but focus on, I don't know, a fox or a deer or something in the thermal imager. So it's it's a question of having enough people with a broad knowledge of species that I myself aren't that good at. And there's quite a few families and groups that I'm not that good at. I'm a generalist, more than a specialist.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. But I mean, for a lot of this stuff, even the people that focus on just one of these groups of animals, and then I take it from a bat perspective, I suppose. I mean, you can spend your whole life just working just on birds or bats or, land-based mammals or whatever. And even then, these people don't regard themselves as experts because there are so many different aspects of studying things like dragonflies or butterflies or moths or whatever it is.
I think one of the I like to think of myself as more of a, not a specialist in a particular group of species, but more knowledgeable about the whole biodiversity aspect of it, the functional ecosystem aspect of it, seeing how things fit together for yourself in the field is something that you can't get from books. It's like, as an example, I'll give you the beavers. We all pretty much know about beavers, how important they are. They're a keystone species. They can provide habitats for other species. They do this, that, and the other. And our landscape would be much better off if we had them. I knew all that. I gleaned that from books. I've been studying wildlife since I was a kid. So that's 40 odd years ago, probably longer than that, 45, 50. So it's been a long time. I've got a fairly good grasp of what goes on in the UK countryside, certainly around our neck of the woods. And I read all this stuff about beavers, but it wasn't until I actually went to see them in the wild, or not necessarily to see them, to see what they do in the wild, because I didn't see them for quite a while. But just seeing what they do for myself filled in a lot of spaces in my knowledge. There were a lot of gaps. So unless you actually see it, you can't understand it fully.
No, absolutely.
And that's,
I can totally relate to that.
And that's why I want to take people down there, because there are a lot of ecologists and naturalists and countryside managers who don't know what they need to know to do what they want to do. And I was one of them. And I still am one of them to some extent, but I know a lot more now than I did before I started going.
Yeah. So I suppose if you see what it looks like in the area that you go to, I suppose it then gives you a visualization in a very real sense, because you're physically there. You can see what it's like, you can hear what it's like, you can smell what it's like, and okay, maybe you're not going to be able to recreate that somewhere else, but at least if you've got the vision as to what's possible, it maybe gets you trying to think in a different way and trying to be creative in a way to maybe a slightly higher extent than what you might have been otherwise. Is that is that a fair way to maybe describe?
Yeah. It's going back to the jigsaw again that we had at the beginning. If you're trying to recreate landscapes and habitats and create biologically intact or biodiverse environments, you need to have a picture of what you're aiming at. Going to somewhere like this gives you that picture, because you've got a lot of functional ecosystems, not entirely natural, because, these are hay meadows we're talking about, but, it's pretty close. And so you can see the picture of what things could look like over here. And the critical thing is that the species you see are familiar, because you could go to, I don't know, the Amazon rainforest, and you can see a biodiverse habitat. It's absolutely no use to you if you want to recreate something here.
Yeah.
You need to see something that is the same species or as similar as possible.
Yeah.
And that's what we get there. We get, there's pretty much all the bird species you would recognize, because they're British species, most.
Yeah.
But there's more of them.
Yeah. Okay, one last question for you, which is probably the big question. All right, why Poland? How did you latch onto that or get interested? What happened? Did you just wake up one morning 15 years ago, whatever it was, and said, I fancy going to Poland to see what that's all about? Or is there some, the world's a big place, how did you end up always going to Poland?
Okay. Well, it was a bit of an accident. It was the first time I went was 2013, I think. So not long before that, I'd been online dating, basically. And I'd met a girl in Rhyl, which is just...
Sorry, was that in Rhyl or in Reel?
In Rhyl, North Wales, Rhyl.
Okay. So it's a real girl from Rhyl.
A real girl, yeah. Or I suppose I should call her a woman, because she is a woman. And we got on okay, and that was it. Yeah, we became friends, or acquaintances, if you like. Anyway, one day she gave me a call, and she said, I've got this friend from Poland. He'd like to come and speak to you about what you do. I said, all right, okay. Can I bring him round? Yeah, sure, bring him round. So this was my friend Jacek, who was, he was somewhere in the slideshow looking at mushrooms. He was interested in what I was doing with wildlife over here, and wanted to know if I would be interested in taking people to his area of Poland, because he's got B&B. And he often had Polish people staying, but he rightly worked out that UK people tend to have more money.
Okay.
And he's got lots of wildlife. So he said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I've not been. I don't know what it's like, so I can't really say. He said, right, come on over. So I went over on that winter with those beautiful blue skies and icicles on the trees. That was my first visit. It was spectacular. Hardly saw any wildlife, but I didn't care. It was just spectacular landscapes. Walked for miles. And he said, well, what do you think? I said, well, yeah, so far so good. Haven't seen much wildlife. Be good to see it in the spring. So I went in the spring or the summer, I can't remember which. And I was just blown away, because going in the winter does not prepare you for what's there in the summer.
Right, just such a contrast.
Yeah, it's total contrast. In the winter with snow, I mean, it's just a blanket of snow and a few footprints, and that's it, basically. One, the odd bird, if you're lucky, flying about. You go in the summer and you can't look anywhere without seeing something new. You could, if you were looking in every direction, every step you took, you wouldn't get anywhere. We only go within a mile or so of where we stay, except for one valley, which is where that beaver habitat was, which is a short drive away. But the rest of it is just in the two valleys by where we stay. And we only walk a mile or two, maybe 3 at the outside, because that takes half the day. And then we've got to come back.
Yeah.
So unless we decide to do a bit of a trek through the forest, which frankly is fairly pointless because you don't see anything except trees mostly, and the odd salamander. You see a lot more out in the valleys by the meadows and stuff. So we don't have to go very far. And it also means that those who are less able, or even who have children, actually my Polish friends have got children, so children are no problem. They can, stay and play with the other kids. But we just bimble along, mainly on the roads, little narrow country roads that basically don't go anywhere. And so we just bimble around and expend not very much energy, don't travel very far, but see a hell of a lot. And what I say to people is, if you imagine you go for a walk in the UK countryside, you go along a footpath somewhere, or even a country lane, you walk along and you stop whenever you see something interesting, and then you keep going. In half a day, you travel a very long way and not see very much at all.
Yeah.
Because there's not much to see anymore. I mean, yeah, if you're in the Caledonian forest wandering through there, then maybe you'd see a few other things. But generally speaking, in the UK countryside, you don't see anything. We can take 4 hours to go less than a mile because it's heaving with stuff. That is the difference. And it's almost impossible to get that over on a slideshow, a presentation, or a Zoom meeting, because it sounds ridiculous. But you've got to see it. And when people do see it, they say, oh, you weren't exaggerating then. It is actually as good as you say it was.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's better.
Yeah.
Because I can't talk about every little aspect of what we've seen. There are numerous things that I haven't even mentioned that were, wow moments.
Yeah.
I just can't cover it.
And it's different for different people. If different people. John's just saying goodbye. Thanks, John. Okay, John's saying riveting. Thank you very much. But he's got to go.
Thanks, John.
I totally, I don't totally get it because I haven't been there, but I can totally imagine. And I would also imagine, just to kind of round things off, I suppose, that if you went over there as an ornithologist or a bat person or an entomologist, you would probably come back with a whole load of information about what you've seen and all the rest of it that would be beyond the level, Martin, that you would talk about, because, as you say, you're more of a generalist.
Yeah.
But somebody doing butterflies over there or moths over there, for argument's sake, they're just going to be up to their armpits, and
Yeah, literally, and sometimes in their armpits. Purple emperors in their armpits. It's certainly possible. And the other thing is, Neil, that not only would you learn a lot of stuff that I can't mention here because I haven't got the knowledge of it, but you would learn stuff about your chosen field that you maybe hadn't thought about before, like sand lizards, for instance. In the UK they live on heathland and they live in sand dunes. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Over there they're living in flower-rich hay meadows, and they're very common, they're very big, and they're very healthy. So what does that tell us about what sand lizards like? Yeah. Why aren't they in that sort of habitat in the UK? Well, one, we haven't got that sort of habitat in the UK. Two, the climate's different. It's wetter and it's colder up here. So is that the reason that sand lizards are only found in sand dunes or heathland? Yeah. Or is it more complicated? Because we have to think that a lot of species have retreated to suboptimal habitats in the UK because their favoured habitats don't exist anymore. And we're in the habit of associating those species with those habitats and assuming that those habitats are their favoured habitats. Yeah. So red squirrels are a prime example. They retreat to conifer woodlands in the face of competition with grey squirrels because it's the last place they can hang on. Not for long, but they can hang on for a bit.
Yeah.
So we've assumed, a lot of people have assumed, red squirrels only found in conifer habitat, that's what they prefer.
Yeah.
Bollocks. It's not true. Red squirrels will live in any woodland habitat virtually, as long as there's tree seeds and buds and fungi and stuff for them to eat, and insects and all sorts of stuff that they eat, in the absence of grey squirrels.
Yeah.
So, and again, nightingales, we associate nightingales with woodland. They're not a woodland species at all. They're woodland edge or scrub species. And we haven't got any woodland edge or scrub left. So they've retreated to the edge of woodland or to just inside woodland. We associate them with woodland. They're not a woodland bird. You can manage a woodland as much as you like to benefit nightingales, and it won't work unless you turn it into woodland edge or scrub. And then they'll like it.
Yeah.
So we've got that habit of associating a bird or a species that is rare with the habitat we find it in now and saying that's its favorite habitat. It's not. That's the suboptimal habitat it's retreated to because its favorite habitat is gone.
Yeah.
And if you leave it in its suboptimal habitat long enough, that'll be it. Game over. So we've got to rethink how things are supposed to work and fit together. And you can't do that unless you've seen it in a landscape that is as similar as possible to the UK landscape. And Southeast Poland, or at least bits of it, comes pretty damn close.
And I think that is a pretty good place to take things to a conclusion. Yeah, would you agree? Yeah.
Yeah.
Martin, thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. If anybody's interested in joining Martin on a trip to Poland, his details are there on the screen. We're recording this in March 2022. So if you're watching this at some point in the future, just look up wildlifeservices.co.uk and check out what Martin's doing at that particular point and see if he's got any trips planned. And if you never go to Poland, if you've watched this webinar, you have at very least learned, hopefully, an awful lot more about the wildlife there, an awful lot more about more biodiverse habitat than what we are accustomed to in the British Isles. And you've hopefully been enthused, encouraged, inspired to spread the word or visualize doing things slightly better than might have been the case if you have the power to do that. So, Martin, I would just like to once again say thank you very much for being our guest on Batability Club. Have you enjoyed yourself? Has it been all right?
Always a pleasure, Neil. Always a pleasure.
Right. Well, in true Batability style, say goodbye to our audience and then I'll stop the recording. Okay.
Bye, audience.